Hey everybody, and welcome to Rosen Bridge's F12 closeout video for Catalyst. With me, I have Joseph Armeanio, who is the co-founder of Rosen Bridge itself. Joe, how you doing tonight?
Doing pretty good.
Fantastic.
Was a little slow to actually get to the closeout stuff. We
Wait,
actually,
when was it due, Joe?
well, we're way behind, but we also developed beyond the scope of the grant, right?
Right, right. So you're behind on the video, but way ahead in the programming code. I think that's a fair trade-off, Joe.
Yeah, I kind of got. We were originally just gonna bridge runes one way, and we kind of reached a point where it's like, well, why not? I mean, Bitcoin is not exactly the most DeFi rich environment, but
Wait, why don't you start with what was the original catalyst, Joe? Why don't we
The
start with that
original
real quick?
the original catalyst was to support the runes protocol to come to Cardano.
Just that's it. Just Bitcoin to Cardano. Done.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the way that Rosen is designed, it would end up at every other endpoint, but
Right.
it opens up a unique class of assets to, potentially go into their DeFi dexes, lending protocols. I guess they have some perp stuff probably these days. Um, Open up new assets to use their underlying technology, right?
So from a
And
tech stack standpoint, that relies on with Rosen Bridge, it relies on a twofold upgrade, right? You had to upgrade the watchers, step those up, and you had to upgrade the guards as well to recognize those that way.
it was a little bit more complicated, to be honest. Some things are Bitcoin's not a very good data layer, right? Uh, that's some of the ongoing drama on Bitcoin these days. So in starting out, we kind of had to say, okay, well, we already support Bitcoin, so there is some uh obvious familiarity and
But
things we can.
but previously you only supported Bitcoin coming over is Rosen BTC onto
Yeah,
Cardano,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So
Not Cardano going into Bitcoin or anything like that.
no, but we're familiar somewhat with the network, right? Now there
Yeah,
is a
yeah.
lot of Runes is a weird protocol, right? It's not based in consensus. It's like an extension. It's actually validated off chain, right? So you have these uh different explorers, different tools that work with validating these assets because they don't actually follow like consensus on Bitcoin. If that makes sense. So it's kind of like on-chain versus off-chain validation, but we do
Okay.
extended UTXO, so it's not that much of a leap, right? The first problem going into it is saying, okay, well, we need to encode our metadata onto Bitcoin, right? That's how Rosen works. That's what we've established in every environment, and president would say that follow your standard, right? That's what standards are for. So we kind of had to say, okay, well, where are we going to, put this data? How are we going to use Bitcoin as a data layer, right? There's a couple of different ways to do that. I believe, came up with three initial designs and then, of course, settled on a fourth. After, a bit of
Was it a totally different design, or was it like a
no,
combo of
it was
two
it
and
was
three? Or
it was an extension. There was a big drama, still is, about Bitcoin V30, right? And so as we're designing this, we're like, okay, we know there's an upgrade potentially coming out that in terms of like having a standard place to put data, a little weird. Personally, I didn't think Core would push it, to be honest. They said, "Oh, we're gonna do it," and I was like, "Oh, like it is very spicy, right?" And usually when it comes to those type of things, it's like BIPs that just get buried for eternity, right?
yeah, yeah.
They never actually go anywhere. And so well, we settled on a design that is backwards compatible, right? So we were building on V29, said let's just build on V29, let Bitcoin community, do whatever they're going to do with this potential upgrade, and let's just kind of stay low, figure out how we can make it work now, and go with that, right? So we actually chose a design where we're you know encoding addresses. We're kind of chunking data, encoding addresses, and then validating that off chain in our system. Um, then it does follow our standard that we set. It is on chain, so watchers can scan for it on chain. And it does kind of fit nicely within like the primitives that we've already been building on, right? But it did take some time to say, okay, now we need to kind of work with the tooling that's out there. That's kind of rune specific, build our own. Uh, and yeah, so it took us a while to lock that in. And obviously we had to build the scanning, the extraction of the events, pull it into the framework itself. And it does kind of create a unique thing where if you look at all of the native token standards on Bitcoin, Runes is definitely the lightest, right? In terms of just uh it's just you're handling op returns and validating them off chain. But runes in some sense are like tokens that don't have any real, I don't know, metadata or function as a whole, right? It's like, oh, here's a dog coin, here's a wolf coin, here's a cat coin, here's a mouse coin, here's a, digital zoo, right? And so it actually does, allow us to extend runes on Bitcoin itself to where, now you can have Sigma USD as a rune, which is pretty cool, right? And it does kind of allow you to step back and say, okay, well, Bitcoin is the deepest uh, pool of censorship resistant liquidity on the planet, right? If you look at just Bitcoin layer one. Now, most people see that as just like this store of value or gold or whatever, but when you do have assets that are directly in that network that you can potentially put that liquidity towards like some form of use case, it's really interesting to think about, especially as, our alternatives that we started with were, centralized exchanges, which are not censorship resistant.
Mm-mm.
They're more like third party middlemen, right? And so that's interesting. Um, I have since talked with a couple of DApps on Cardano about, hey, we've opened this as a potential. You may want to look at working with these communities, creating some form of yield. We've also been working with a couple of projects on Bitcoin, talking with them, and there are, let's say, enhanced runes coming, which is pretty cool. So you will have like more mature assets uh, on Bitcoin.
So
And
you
so,
the other way too, Joe. Sorry to interject here. The other way too. So if we bring a rune over to Cardano, we'll
mhm.
say, can we give more information to that rune as it comes over, as well to
You don't,
enhance it on the Cardano side?
not really. You don't really want to. What you want to do is provide access to tooling that it doesn't have, right?
Gotcha.
You don't have native lending markets, right?
Yep.
You have Liquid and others on Cardano. If you're talking like perpetuals, you do have like these frameworks for more mature marketplaces. Right now on Bitcoin, a lot is like partially signed Bitcoin transactions where you're kind of have some either like intermediary helping two people swap, or you're kind of doing like the atomic swap, which is not necessarily new and a little janky in terms of aligning liquidity versus an extended UTXO system like Cardano. You have a ton of different tools, dexes,
Bring it
places
in
to
with a,
fit.
you could form a DAO based on your runes
Yeah,
over in
exactly.
Bitcoin brought out of Cardano. Yeah.
Yeah, there's just tooling there that is not available anywhere else, and that does lead to like more mature marketplace access, right? And so I'm quite happy now because we did all of this extra work, and did kind of retain our underlying design in Rosen. Every Cardano asset is potentially a rune, right? And that's where things kind of get interesting. Is it's like, okay, so we have this night token that dropped on Cardano that's pretty um, hot right now, where so people are talking about it. It's got a decent amount of volume around. Well, there is a new potential marketplace on Bitcoin itself, right? Some people might find that interesting. It does allow for uh, just a different type of interoperability with Bitcoin. Now, it's probably not going to be the most popular thing with some of the more purist Bitcoiners.
Curious, yeah.
That's fine. To be honest, like I understand their mindset because it's never really changed, right? They're very much like bare UTXO
hmm
focused,
hmm
right? And that's okay. And to be honest, a lot of the things where if I wanted to create extensions, you know, to Bitcoin, and inevitably I end up creating Ergo anyway, so why waste my time,
Right.
right? Um,
Yep.
but it does open up some interesting opportunities. There's one project on Bitcoin that's called Ducat, which is kind of working on making a MakerDAO style um, CDP where you can, take Bitcoin, collateralize it, create a censorship resistant stablecoin that's backed by Bitcoin. And that opens up some cool stablecoin potential for Cardano as well, beyond the traditional, um, you know, USDC, USDT, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm pretty excited about that. Um, so we've been live now for like 2 weeks. There have been a couple of different transfers from Cardano that have, or not from Cardano, from Bitcoin that have ended up on Cardano. I've actually talked with Dan from the Palm team if that's something they're ever interested in, and they're kind of looking in on the legal side because they have to always like
Yeah, very
protect
be careful about that. Yep.
protect that
Yep.
attack vector, which makes things a lot more complicated. But I do think long term, that's something that we're planning on building out, and teams already kind of brainstorming in terms of how can we make Bitcoin DeFi better. And so I do hope that long term we end up, bringing assets to Cardano, from Cardano to Bitcoin, and just kind of keep building out Rosen.
And
So
I mean, is there a market out there on central exchanges for listing Bitcoin runes at this point? Are you
yeah, there are some. I think CoinEx was actually the first,
so?
which I'm not too surprised. They have some
But
decent
I mean,
utility.
Rosen gives you ability to really bootstrap that quickly,
Yeah, yeah.
comparatively speaking.
Yeah, so there is actually some potential. Like I could always talk to an exchange that already has the infrastructure and say, okay, could we potentially list as a rune? They might go for it. I don't know. I'd have to talk to them. I haven't yet, but there is other exchanges that do support runes. I know Kraken does. I know CoinEx does, and so I guess potentially if there's enough volume and users, even a Cardano project could actually like build volume on Bitcoin and get listed as a rune.
Yeah, yeah. There's enough volume and users. I'm sure the exchanges would recognize the money potential and those kind of things. That's all it is with them. So that
Hmm.
is what it is. Yep,
Yeah, so it's the first extension of the runes protocol, which is a pretty nice feather in the hat, I guess.
it is. Fantastic. What's next, Joe?
Oof. So we're doing some research into the base protocol at the moment. It's kind of a weird sometimes doing layer two because uh, like the base. Uh,
Based is Ethereum based, Coinbase's chain.
yeah, yeah, it's it's
Yeah.
it's it is based on EVM, so that does make some things easy, but there are some weird things around how the network executes, I guess, that potentially we need to watch out for. So we're just trying to like get a full handle on what we'd be moving into.
Right, and
And you also,
the idea for Base was much lower transaction fees than Ethereum kind of thing.
yeah, yeah, and there's also some ongoing research into Kraken. They've created their own layer two, which I assume all of these exchanges are going to.
Do we know how that bridging protocol works to move between chains like that there? Are they just exchanging it, or are they actually doing some bridging in the back end when you're
I would say it's pseudo decentralized in all
pseudo?
honesty, but yeah, I mean, like there's some form of distributed assumption, I guess.
Right, right.
Um, but they are becoming like an extension of the exchange environment. We've already seen them announce that all of the assets that are listed on base will, be able to kind of reach the Coinbase users. And I assume
Hmm.
that Kraken's going to do the same. I assume that Binance is going to do the same
Yep.
because you generally try to like vertically integrate your stack and then
Hmm.
capture market share. So I do think that's one of the most interesting things we could do next to try to help like drive the Cardano ecosystem and the Ergo ecosystem and it's kind of Rosen. So that's an ongoing work in progress.
All right, well, that sounds good. Thanks so much for talking about this, Joe.
Yep.
Ciao.